Hey Reddit enthusiasts! Today we'll take a journey through the captivating world of the front page of the internet. In this video, we'll cruise the vast and diverse landscape of Reddit, seeing some of its incredible communities. But beware, as we delve into the darker corners where users share bone-chilling tales that'll make your spine tingle. Brace yourself for a riveting exploration into the shadows lurking behind the seemingly smiling interface. Viewer discretion is advised. This is Reddit like you've never seen before. Our first story for today comes from the user under the name of Dental Nylon. This story was posted on Reddit approximately 8 years ago, but that doesn't make it any less scary. The story goes, when I was about 12 years of age, I started getting left alone at home, and at that time something used to shush me. I'd be pouring cereal, singing along to the TV, and suddenly, shh. First time it happened, I absolutely crapped myself and didn't say a word until someone came home. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'd even start to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then it would happen again and again. I think it happened about 5 or 6 times. One Saturday morning I was in my top bunk. The beds were super noisy and the slightest movement would result in them creaking. Shh! I thought it was my younger sister and decided to annoy her further. I started rocking about in my bunk bed, making as much noise as I possibly could, and suddenly, shh! I chuckled, still thinking it was my sister, and then she whispered nervously from below, "Was that you? The shushing? Was that you?" I popped my head down to look at her face and said, "No, it was you." She looked terrified. Her eyes welled up with tears and she said, "No, it wasn't." She ran out of the room crying and wouldn't come back in for a long time. I realized it must have been the shushy ghost and was overcome with relief that I wasn't crazy because someone else had actually bloody heard it. Haven't heard it since, but I'm always kind of waiting. Someone in the comments said that the user's house was built on top of a library. Now, while that could be funny, but it could also be somewhat true. What do you think? Our second story is posted by the Redditor Yoinky2013, who encountered such an incident that they still can't explain what had happened. When I was in high school, the days before cell phones were common, my friends used to come over to pick me up from my house. One night, we had made plans for my friends to pick me up at 7 p.m. At 6, my parents said I had to come with them to do something, and I totally forgot to call my friends and tell them. They came to my house at 7 p.m. and called the house phone. No one answered. There was 4 of them in the car. They all told us the exact same story. They said that they were about to pull out of my driveway, but they saw someone peek through the blinds from the bedroom on the top right floor. That was my room, so they assumed that I was messing around. More times they said that someone would peek through the blinds, and a couple of them said they even saw the person's eyes. We got home at probably 7:10 to 7:15, and my friends were still in our driveway. One of my friends came over and said they thought I was messing with them. Then they asked me, "So who is staying in your room?" I told them that no one. So they asked, "Who is in your house right now?" Again, I told them, "No one." Their faces turned stone cold. Then they told me what they had seen repeatedly over the last 15 minutes. At first, we all thought there was a burglar in the house or something, so we called the cops. The cops came over and inspected the house. There was 0 signs of break-in, nothing was touched, and nothing was stolen. Our house had an alarm on it, so there is no way someone could have come into the house without setting off the alarm. My family, my friends, and the cops all kind of stood around for a few minutes trying to make sense of the situation. My friends swore, and they still do, that they couldn't have imagined what they saw. All 4 of them saw the same things, and it wasn't particularly a dark night, so their eyes couldn't be playing tricks on them. To this day, none of us can make sense of the situation. Told this story on Reddit a while ago, but my friends and I still talk about it years later. Now I can see why the user might have thought their friends were joking with them, but since the cops were actually called, the situation might not be as funny as it seemed. The third story for today may not first seem like a big deal, but the ending sure will make you think otherwise. It was posted on Reddit by the user named Ray of Sunshine. The story goes, my family and I had just rented this beautiful historical house that was built around the Underground Railroad era. It had small hideouts and doors where slaves would hide in. As soon as we moved it, we got uncomfortable vibes from it. We'd hear footsteps coming from upstairs when everyone was downstairs. The TV would turn on, off by itself. Doors would open and close by themselves. We eventually accepted the fact that we had a ghost, and it seemed harmless, so we called her Claudia. Each of my family members had at least seen Claudia once. She was a tall, dark figure who moved fast. Most of the hauntings would come from my bedroom. It was always cold and had an unpleasant smell. My little brother began sleepwalking and would have terrible nightmares. One night became the final straw for my family and our relationship with Claudia. My sister and I were away at our friends while my parents and brothers were at home. The whole house was asleep when my dad woke up from screaming coming from my bedroom. When he ran out past the living room, where my little brother likes to sleep because of his sleepwalking, he noticed that my brother wasn't there. So he ran up the stairs where he met my older brother who had heard the screaming as well, and they both saw that my bedroom door was shut, and they realized that it was my little brother screaming inside the room. They both went to open the door, but it was like something was blocking it. So my dad busted down the door, and as the door flew open, a black shadow ran right past him and my brother. He then entered my room that was so cold, he could see his own breath. He looked over at my little brother who was laying on my bed and covered in sweat and tears, and started yelling his name to wake him up. But my little brother just pointed, still asleep, at the corner of the room and started yelling, "Get her, Daddy, get her!" My dad looked over but saw nothing but pitch black. That was enough for him. He quickly grabbed my brother who was stiff as a board and ran the hell out of there. When my brother woke up the next day, he had no memory of what had happened that night and still doesn't remember when he talks about it almost 5 years later. We moved out of that house a few weeks after the incident, and my brother stopped sleepwalking as soon as we did. We've heard a few other stories from the people who currently own the house, but nothing quite as terrifying as what happened to my brother or my dad. The house has a great history behind it, but it was too creepy for my family. To live in an old house is one thing, but to live in an old house that comes with a shadow figure is terrifying altogether. The user and their family experienced such a scary incident, and even though they moved from the house soon after, I don't think they will forget such incidents so easily. Our next story takes us over all the way to the country of India, where the Redditor and their family was just trying to enjoy a peaceful vacation. The story was posted by the user. Well, you can read it. When I was 15, my family went for a trip to a hill station named Shimla in India. We booked suite in a hotel, in which the master bedroom had a glass platform of size 8 by 8 feet, sticking about 2 feet outside the room over the valleys which were hundreds of feet below us. Being an adventurous kid, I decided to sleep on that platform overlooking the hills and valleys, while my dad slept on the bed and my mother and sister in another bedroom. So, at around 1:30 a.m., I was sleeping on my side, facing the glass, which was about 3 inches away from my face, when suddenly my eyes opened and I saw a woman looking at me intently from outside the glass. I still remember clearly, her face was totally pale and eyes were dark with black hair and some dark cloth on the body. I can only explain her gaze as that of a lion before he jumps in to kill his prey. It took me 3 to 4 seconds to realize where I was, and that it's not some human looking through a window, but some entity literally floating outside my room. I shouted as loud as I could and pushed myself back so hard from the glass that I ended up hitting the other end of the room by force. My dad woke up and turned all the lights on, but there was no one to be seen. That was the last time I ever slept with my window shades open in my life. It's been 8 years since the incident, but those eyes still terrify me to this day. It was not sleep paralysis. I used to have 2 recurring scary dreams since I was 4 years old, which continued till I was 10. I've had sleep paralysis for a long time in recent years as well, so I know it was something that was outside of my mind. So what do you guys think it was? An entity or just a very vivid episode of sleep paralysis? As you guys can probably tell, I have a pretty new channel here, so if you like this type of video and want to watch more such videos in the future, Please do consider giving my channel a like and a subscribe, as it will help me continue this series. The following story was posted under the username of Sweet and Salty Anxiety under the subreddit Ghosts. The story goes, I grew up in a seriously haunted house, so it takes a lot of something paranormal to really scare me. I've seen things, heard things. Startle me, sure. Scare me? Nah. Here's the only time I've ever been actually scared. I lived in an apartment complex about 11 years ago, and other than some terrifyingly large spiders, never heard or saw anything paranormal. Then the old dude who lived across from me had a party one weekend, and his brother passed away. Alcohol poisoning. His body laid there for over 12 hours because everyone thought that he was sleeping. After he passed, I would occasionally hear some odd sounds, but nothing major. Then one night I was laying in my bed with my toddler waiting for her to go to sleep, and something blocked the light that had been shining into the room from the bathroom. I whipped my head up off the pillow and looked toward the door, and there was a black mass that was loosely in the shape of a person standing in the doorway. My whole body started tingling, and I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment because I was terrified and unsure if it was a real person who had broken in or something else. I popped my eyes back open, and it was gone, so I hopped up out of bed and grabbed my shotgun and a couple shells and took off after it. The only door into the apartment still had both locks, and the chain was still in place. Windows were closed and locked. I checked under every bed and inside all the closets. I didn't find anything. I heard noises again after that, but never saw anything. I moved a couple of months later when my lease was up. Our last story for today was posted by Hawking's Wheelchair. It is a pretty cool username, but the incident that follows the username tells a whole another story. My family always had something around in every house we've lived in. It's hard to choose just one story, so I'll choose the most recent. So this house I'm currently at, we've had some occurrences. Our beds would shake like a mini earthquake. My dad said he saw a predator camouflage outline in the trees watching us while checking what my dog was barking at, and we've had them choke us in the night. That's what happened to me most recently. My sister used to crash in our living room when visiting from school. At this time, I was unemployed and stayed up until 4 a.m. every day playing video games. One night, I heard a loud gurgling sound, so I went to check it out when I saw my dog and my sister had tears in her eyes. She looks at me and points at the light, so I flick the switch and she sits up, gasping for air. I asked her, "What's wrong?" and she didn't say a thing. She finally asked if she could use my bed, and I let her, solely for me being able to use the larger living room TV for myself. A few months later, I took a nap on the same couch at around 7, but woke up around 15 minutes later to see 2 glowing circles, eyes, red around the edges, yellow in the middle, staring at me. I felt something pulling me to the armrest, not fully, but enough to realize I'm in serious unexplainable trouble, and I could not speak, let alone scream for help. My right arm was lifted slightly, like it was putting me in a goddamn supernatural sleeper hold, but I had my phone in my left pocket and dialed the same sister's number. I hear her voice, so I start flicking the phone, tapping it until I see the hallway light turn on. She runs over and sees me tearing up like her, and she screams, "Stop!" at the top of her lungs, and I finally could breathe. We haven't slept in that room since, but I'm still interested in knowing why and what exactly was choking us. Thank you so much for watching the video. Till next time, be safe, and I will see you in the dark.